All right, well, we will go ahead and get started today. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar as we look at how to plan and pivot your way to intentional success with your marketing and sales in 2022. So before we get into the meat of our topic, just a few logistics. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are already familiar with Zoom webinar and the control panel, but throughout the session today, as questions arise to your mind, please submit those through the Q&A box that you should see that either at the bottom or perhaps at the top of your screen. So we'll be monitoring those questions throughout the session, and we've allowed time at the end to be able to answer those questions. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I know a common question is whether the webinar recording will be available after the session, and the answer is yes, that once the recording is ready, all registered attendees will receive a link, and all of our past webinars are also available on our website. So going over our plan for today, in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, and then I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes reflecting on the related topic that we covered just over a little over a year ago at this point in the end of January 2021 to set the stage for our panel discussion today. Then our panelists will share their perspectives and insights on some key questions that I'm going to pose to them as the moderator for our session today. Our goal is to wrap up the moderated part of the discussion around 1 o'clock Eastern time, just under an hour from now, and then allowing time to answer questions that you submit through the Q&A box. We have a firm stop that we'll have at 1 o'clock. So if we haven't wrapped everything up by then, we'll do so at that point. So now for the introductions, and I'll lead us off. I am Lisa Puri. I am one of the principals of Love & Company and the Chief Client Services Officer. I head up our strategic sales and marketing teams who work in partnership with our clients to achieve their marketing, sales, and revenue goals. And I am joined today by 3 women that I have the absolute honor to work with closely and learn from every day. So I'd like them to introduce themselves. And Joan, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
Sure, thank you. I'm Joan Kelly Kincaid. I am a strategic sales advisor with Love & Company, and I partner with our clients, working with them to achieve their sales and occupancy goals. We do that with process development, assessments, coaching, and training. And I'm very happy to be with all of you today.
Hi, I'm Sarah Montalto, the Vice President of Strategic Services. I work with our clients primarily who are either undergoing expansions or need of turnaround support to increase their occupancy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kate Leach, and I too am a strategic sales advisor with Love & Company. I function very much like Joan, with a lot of focus on coaching, training, and supporting our client's sales team.
Well, thank you, ladies. And again, I am so excited about our conversation today, and really pleased that Joan, Sarah, and Kate could join me for this. All right, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes setting the stage for our conversation. And I mentioned in January of last year, we had hosted a webinar that looked ahead at 2021 at that point, sketching out how we thought communities, marketing, and sales would evolve in the face of the pandemic. We identified at that point what we knew and looked ahead at how we thought the year would unfold. So we touched on what are the things that through almost the first year of the pandemic, what are the highlights that we had identified through our experience in 2020, and I say our experience, but as a field. Things we've heard from working with our clients, also things that we've heard from talking with partners and others in the field. It was a big year for the audience, our audience being online. We talked about the differences in the sales cycle and how that has changed, largely thanks to digital, our learning curve with getting up to speed on doing all things virtual. Marketing automation really, I think, came into its own much more. We talked a lot about nurturing and things like lead capture and speed to lead. And of course, the all important data tracking. And, we still had a point of getting back to the basics was really important. So looking ahead again, what did we think would unfold in 2021, identifying anticipated impacts on communities and the field as a whole, the senior living field as a whole, and what would that mean for seniors, their mindsets, as at that point we looked forward to a post-pandemic world. Of course, January of 2021 is when we first saw the vaccines rolling out, and there was a lot of anticipation and hope. So as we looked forward to 2021 at that point in time and the path to rebuilding census, that a lot of communities took a hit during 2020 when, we kind of tightened up and waited to see what would happen. But a few key things at that point we said is that knowing what consumers are thinking, that really is so critical on a local level. It was more important than ever, but don't assume. We talked a lot about projecting our own perspectives or personal concerns and fears on what our audience, our prospective residents were thinking, but don't assume that. Find out, ask the question, do conversations and surveys. We talked about the fact through research that consumers were concerned, but there's not a mass exodus from the field. Leads and depositors in particular, they needed reassurance. We talked about the importance of proactively planning out the year, meeting the audience where they are, planning ahead, but being flexible. And spoiler, we'll hear a little bit more about that soon. We did talk about and say that 2020 had increased that stay-at-home competitive pressure. And it was more important than ever to we talked about overcoming that sea of sameness and telling your story in an authentic, clear manner. Really knowing as part of that who you are and who you are for. And I mentioned before, being intentional about the basics, getting back to those best practices that serve us well when times are challenging. We talked about being time for a sales mindset reset and the importance of reestablishing trust through active listening. So now fast forward to today, and we're not yet in a post-pandemic environment that we anticipated maybe at that point in time. We find ourselves actively adapting with the changing pandemic. I think we're all going to be very well versed in the Greek alphabet, potentially, now that we're already several variations through. And in fact, many are recognizing and scientists are saying that COVID-19 may be with us in some form for the foreseeable future, as opposed to history that we are fully looking at behind us. So what does this mean? What does this mean for seniors, for communities, and for the senior living field as a whole? So in our session today, our panelists are going to reflect on key takeaways now that we have 2021 in our rearview mirror, and what that means for senior living sales and marketing as we move forward. They're going to be talking through practical application of that learning to help drive best practices and success in 2022. So hopefully that was a real nice quick trip down memory lane there. And we'll go ahead now and get into our panel discussion. And the first, I'm going to start our discussion by asking each of our panelists to respond to a key question, and then have the rest of the group share their input on that point before moving on to the next panelist's answer. So my question to start us off is, what would you identify as the most important takeaway learned from 2021 to carry forward into 2022? So Sarah, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Thanks, Lisa. So one of the things that you're mentioning, when I think back to the start of 2021, it was how hopeful I was with the vaccine rollout, and that there was at least a path to getting back to, business as usual and really that pre-COVID world. And as we've rolled through and had these different variants, my biggest takeaway from this year and how it needs to impact marketing operations and sales operations going forward is contingency planning. And it's not even just having a plan A and plan B of how you'll move forward, but plan C and beyond. That the word pivot in the title for this webinar really rings true as part of that, because we really need to adapt. Even looking into this year, in the fall, when numbers were looking like they were going down and planning events for January 2022, we had clients that we were working with that planned on-site events. As we got through late November into early December, we're still crossing our fingers. And then as the news for Omicron kept changing, that we made the decision a week before a mailer was to go to the printer that we're not doing on-site. We're switching over to webinar and making sure that we build our times into that schedule so that change could happen. And I mean, that's just one very small example about how different changes are happening minute by minute at the state, county, and even the community level that impact our marketing and sales operations, and that we need to be planning for that on an ongoing basis.
Sarah, thank you. I think that's a great point to lead us off as far as having multiple contingency plans. Joan, what are your thoughts on Sarah's point about contingency planning?
Thank you, Lisa. I couldn't agree more. I think that understanding what a contingency plan is and how to put it together is the corollary to the idea that it was really important in this past year, because a contingency plan is looking at what worked well in the past, but looking at it from a new perspective. So contingency planning is all about adjusting while using a growth mindset. And that means we have to be willing to look at old things and new things with a fresh eye. And sometimes that's not easy to do, but the best contingency plans are built that way. And when they are, I think that I found in the last year that those plans were really well understood, that they were trusted, and the teams embraced them as the new standard, as the way to go, at least for that time. They were always built on really strong fundamentals and good core habits, and they were measurable compared to the previous standard. So I guess what I'm saying is that they were very intentional, and everybody was really aware of each adjustment and agreeing to it. And actually, in many cases, the contingency plan in many ways became the new standard.
Joan, I think that's an excellent point. And you know what I'm hearing you say too is a contingency plan should not be seen as the B team. It shouldn't be I'm settling for something that's less than, but it's just as good a solution as what your ideal plan is. Exactly.
And Lisa, it might not be just as good as, only just as good as, it might be the only thing you can do. So it's not the B plan. It is the way to go, which is why I think we should think of standard operating procedures not as suggestions. They're the way to do business. And it should always be considered the A plan, to your point.
I think that's great. Well, Kate, let's hear from you. What's your perspective on this topic that Sarah raises about contingency planning?
I can relate to what you both are saying. I mean, of all the pivoting that's gone on in the past year, contingency planning has been a huge focus for us and for our clients. And like Sarah, I was so hopeful and excited about what 2021 would bring. You know, the return of everything in person, tours, events, entertainment, and especially in person for our residents, right? Who were finally free to gather and to have family and friends visit. But we all know how the story went. The bad guys stayed, and the variants challenged our hope and dashed our plans for everything to go back to normal. So enter the new normal. And I know it's cliche at this point, but we had to face the reality that COVID is part of our lives now. It's not going anywhere. And we have to have our plan A, plan B, plan C, and even plan D if these face-to-face scenarios can't happen. For example, if you're hosting an on-site educational event like Sarah talked about, you'll need to pivot and offer that virtual platform as well, so that even if prospects are allowed on-site, those who aren't comfortable will still have the ability to join in, participate, and engage. In addition, teams should always be prepared to offer that virtual tour. And I don't mean the one, that's housed on some of our websites. I mean an actual engaging video tour where we're bringing our prospects and families along with us, whether that's via FaceTime, Zoom, Google Meet, whatever platform they are comfortable with, because in reality, we have to be comfortable with all of them. Do we want our prospects on site? I mean, of course we do. It's ingrained in us to welcome people to our communities. But the reality is that many times our plan B will be for them to experience our communities virtually. We have to quite literally be able to meet prospects where they are in the headspace that they're at and make them feel comfortable and safe as they learn about us.
Kate, I think that's a great point. And much as we talked about, a plan B and a plan C is not less than for some of our prospects that their ideal, their most comfortable situation will be connecting with you, virtually. And we've seen great success with that this year. So we absolutely know it's possible. So well, now I'd like to take us back to the original question. And Joan, I want to pose it to you. What would you identify as the most important takeaway learned from 2021 to carry forward into 2022?
It's connected, Lisa, to this idea of planning, whether it's supporting the standards and plans we have in place or building contingency plans, as Sarah and Kate were just talking about. I think my takeaway from that was that we have to have solid foundations and really clear standards. We just talked about plans that work best, even when we decide to change the plan. And what I found is those plans that were built on really strong fundamental skills and good habits and included the insights and experience of the team, those were the most successful plans, even when they were contingency plans. They were, as you said, not plan B. They were a great plan. Those folks incorporated everything. They incorporated process, they incorporated data, they looked at the narrative and at the experience and skill of the team, and all of that together made a difference. And an example of that I found really clearly with the team at McLean in Simsbury, Connecticut. This is a 2-person part-time sales team. And in September of 2020, leadership and the sales team decided they wanted to embrace a fresh look because we were still, as we all know, raging through the pandemic. And they were at a point where they had existing IL to take care of, AL, and an expansion that was in place and evolving. So they looked at their process. They had great skills and habits, and really their processes worked very well to that point. But between the pandemic and the evolution of their expansion, they really wanted to look at things with a fresh eye. So we got together and we looked at process. We looked at capacity and their structure in the department. We looked at time management and contact management. So all of this together contributed to a new plan. It was based on the foundations from which they came. And what happened is that plan was put in place at the end of 2020, became the standard for 2021, and it's still in place. We fresh skills and habits. We learned new things, and all of that informed every step of it so that we were beginning, but with the end in sight. And I say that because this team was particularly intentional and aware. So as they adjusted, we discussed why we were adjusting and deciding that the adjustment made sense. It all worked well. They ended 2021 with only a couple of available existing IL apartments. We added another sales professional for AL so that became stronger as well. That increased capacity, increased better time management, better contact management. And I'm very proud of them. Their goal was to have 42 10% deposits at the end of the year. That was the covenant goal. They exceeded that covenant goal by 7 and had 49 10% deposits, and they're getting ready for move-ins in July of this year. They're currently at 51 10% deposits and still exceeding those covenant goals. That all came from careful planning based on what came before, measuring it, being aware of change, and having strong fundamentals that they continued to train and evolve. It was fluid and it was a path, but it wasn't engraved in granite. Any changes we made, we agreed to, we embraced them, we decided they made sense. We all do that every day in our work. And a really great example that we're all familiar with is for sales professionals who know we have to make a certain number of contacts every day, et cetera. We know that's our standard, right? That's our plan. If we veer from it, and I don't make a lot of calls today, or my goal for calls today, it may not matter. It may not even matter if I don't do it tomorrow, because I have appointments already scheduled for the end of the week and even a few for the beginning of next week. But if I do that day after day after day, I will have problems in 2-3 weeks. I won't have any appointments. We're all familiar with that. And I bet we can all find examples that are very similar to that in our private life and even in our professional lives. There's actually a name for that, and it's a funny name. It's called the normalization of deviance. And Lisa, I gave you a slide if you would share that with everybody. What this is the normalization of deviance is what I just described. It's a gradual process where we decide to just accept practices that we previously hadn't planned for, that we said were not acceptable. And what happens is, over time, as we do that, and we don't have anything bad happen, it becomes our new normal. And the lady that came up with this, her name is Diane Vaughn. As you can see, she's professor of sociology at Columbia. And Dr. Vaughn first formalized this theory when she worked with NASA after the Challenger catastrophe. And you can see from this spiral that the original normal in the middle, maybe I'm making calls and I don't make as many as I want to. That's my first deviation. Nothing bad happens. And I say that was good enough. And the next day I do it again and again. The problem is those new normals and those deviations have no memory of each other. So it just adds up until it syncs up and I have no appointments scheduled, or I have no sales, or something else happens in another department. This happens to all of us. And although it's the normalization of deviance, it's pretty normal. And I think we can all laugh about it and say, yeah, I do that too. The trick is to be aware of it so that you can catch it and get back on track, because that's what a standard is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a path built with the end in sight. And it's okay to change. It's okay to be fluid. And standards have to evolve. But we have to be aware of it and agree that the adjustment is worthwhile. And back in 1999, the Institute of Medicine did a study with RNs looking at results and looking at behaviors. And they said it beautifully. They said to err is human, but to drift from standards is the normalization of deviance. And it's something we really have to watch out for. And I believe that when we do, and when we build on really great skills and habits, that our plans and even our contingency plans tend to be a lot more successful. And a long way to get there, but that's my biggest takeaway from last year. I think it's about being intentional and aware.
Joan, thank you. And I think we should start calling you Dr. Joan, because I always love listening to all and learning from all the knowledge that you have to share. And I think, we've seen this time and time again, that when we deviate from our standards and something surprises us that comes out of left field, whether it's COVID or whether it's, the real estate bubble popping, gosh, we're going on so many years ago now at this point, but those of us who have been around that long can remember, if we're not ready with those standards and foundations, that we get caught by surprise and get knocked off further than we need to. So anyway, my little interim color commentary there. But Kate, Joan brought up this great point about solid foundations and clear standards. What's your perspective on what she shared?
Well, first of all, that was really informational and great, and you're a hard act to follow, Joan. I feel like I need to find my psychology journal somewhere. But I do have a couple of thoughts. In my experience, sales and marketing teams have always needed and even wanted clear and specific guidance on how to operate on a daily basis. Oftentimes it's training, coaching, group planning, as well as having access to fully engaged leadership. But in today's environment, a big addition to that solid foundation is that teams have to be, as we've all said at least once here, more intentional in everything they do. That means not just keeping up prospect activities and interactions, but it does mean, doing very thoughtful, creative follow-up, home or front porch visits, and anything else that leads to building and strengthening relationships with our prospects. It means using the information that we've gathered to ask important questions that lead to advances in the prospect's journey. Our foundation has shifted and we have to adapt by using the new tools that we have available. So video, digital assets, and the really robust CRMs that are out there today. I'm thinking Enquire, Sherpa, Welcome Home. We have to set clear standards about using these technologies at every available opportunity because it will help us reach our prospects where they are. It's their journey and we want to stay in step with them on that journey.
Kate, that's I love what you're pointing out there, and I think technology and that point is something that we've been talking a lot about and hearing a lot about, but it's tied very closely in with powerful CRMs and really being able to use them to their full potential, and that's so much more important now than even before. Well, Sarah, please chime in and contribute your thoughts on Joan's point about solid foundations and standards.
Thanks. So the thing that really comes to mind from with both Kate and Joan shared really relates to all of these new technologies that we're looking to sales teams to use, and how do we create the standards and look to our overall foundations to really aid in the adoption of these by the sales team. That we can't look at a new technology as something that's rolled out and it's one and done, but what does the overall adoption period look like? Early last fall, working with Westminster Canterbury Richmond, they began using Your Tour, and it wasn't just an initial training with the team at the Vector, but it was having that, then having follow-up time for that sales team to come together, talk about everything that they learn, go out and use it with their prospects for a week, and come back together and talk about how it's working for them. What are additional assets that can be added to make it more robust? And we're still talking about how to continually improve the way the team is using it and really maximizing their flexibility in use and adding new assets to really highlight the community when they can't bring people on campus. And that really should be a typical rollout process for new technology, not just the initial training, but the repeated brainstorming and check-in to keep the teams on target and to really make sure that they're successful with whatever the new technology is, because that's what's needed to actually create that foundation, create that new standard, how to best use this technology with platforms. And it's the same for your tour, whether you're using webinars, whether you're touring virtual tours through your community, but really investing your time and getting comfortable with that technology so that you can be successful with it.
Sarah, I think it's an excellent point, and organizations can invest a little or a lot in the technology, but they're not going to get the ROI unless the people who need to use it to make it really effective are comfortable with it. And different people have different ways of learning and different ways of getting comfortable. But I think what we've seen is the most prominent way to do that is just to be able to get in and get their hands on it and play with it and practice it and use it. And then share what their experience is with their teammates. So I think that's a great point. So Kate, now you get to be on the hot seat. I'd like your perspective on my original question. And again, of course, everyone can see it here on the screen, but what would you, Kate, say is the most important takeaway learned from 2021 that you would advise our audience to carry forward into 2022?
If anyone is listening that has worked with me or knows me, there are three really important words in sales, and they're discovery, discovery, and discovery. We talk a lot about this now in senior living, getting to know our prospects and their families on a deeper level, and realizing that this is integral to the overall sales process. Prospects buy from people they trust, and we've known that for a long time. Now pivot again to the current environment. Fear and uncertainty are prevalent among the population we work with. So there's an even greater need, a more immediate need to gain trust. We must provide reassurance that we're looking out for their best interests, that we're their advocate, that we care. That's most important. And we should be acting as a guide rather than just a salesperson. It's our best opportunity to uncover what those fears and uncertainties are, and then discover how we can help mitigate them. This will help us move our prospects forward rather than stagnating or moving backward. So in order to be that guide, we need to ask those meaningful questions, and it can be motivational interviewing, active listening. It's all tied in. What has life for you living at home during COVID-19 been like? What, if anything, has this experience brought to light for you? Just opening up that conversation can bring fears and concerns to the surface. And whether it's about isolation, loneliness, health problems, or whatever else is going on, they do need to be brought to the surface. We can better understand what actions to take to address and hopefully move past this immobilization that so many of our prospects and families are experiencing. A great example from this past year is a client of ours, St. James Place in Baton Rouge. Their sales team made more sales than they have in over 20 years. So a record-setting year among, the COVID-19 that was still going on. And no, their lead generation didn't improve. They did nothing new in terms of incentives. It really had to do with the sales team's intentional, consistent communication with prospects and families. They kept in close communication with their prospects. That helped secure the team's role as that trusted resource and advisor that we want to be. Prospects and families depended on this team to help them navigate through senior living And quite frankly, in a time when communal living seemed a little more frightening than it did comforting. And this led to that team to be able to share the stories then of their own residents and how they benefited from being in the community during the pandemic, how their residents were surrounded by dedicated staff and their friends, and how they were given basically everything they needed to feel safe, and then most importantly, to stay engaged.
Kate, I absolutely love to hear that. And you know, I know working with you closely too on helping St. James Place and, you know, moving in the direction they did. I couldn't agree with you more about how proud we are of what that sales team has been able to accomplish under your guidance. So, so thank you. Sarah, you know, Kate raises this great question about discovery, and building those relationships and how important that is. What are your thoughts on that topic that Kate raised?
So one of the things, I want to take it to a little bit different angle, that it's not just discovery with your prospects, but conducting discovery with your new residents and really learning how they feel about living in a community right now. One of the things that stood out to me with one-on-one interviews and group discussions that I've done with residents who've moved in during COVID-19 is that how different their stories and their perspective is from what our prospects are hearing in the news cycle. I know in the field that we know that there's a difference between assisted living and skilled nursing in those stories versus what somebody experiences in independent living, but we need to make sure we're bringing forward those storytelling attributes into our marketing communications right now to really let our prospects hear firsthand from residents what it's like through panel discussions, whether they're in person and webinars, sharing testimonials, either on direct mail or in blogs or social media, but really giving them a sense of what life is like in a communal setting right now, and really how it is so much different than what's in the news cycle. And the discovery is really what's going to give us the ability to capture those stories.
Sarah, thank you for bringing that point out. And a big thing I hear you say too is authenticity. Mm-hmm. You know, and how important that is to be authentic and transparent. But Joan, why don't we hear from you on this point that Kate raised about discovery and that relationship development?
Boy, it's been an interesting couple of years, and I agree with what Kate said about knowing our client on a deeper level with discovery. That's something that I've noticed evolving over the last many years, but particularly recently. And what specifically stood out to me is that I see sales teams with far more focus connecting emotionally with their prospects as early in the process as possible, as early in the decision cycle as they can. And when that happens, I've also seen that process feel far less, feeling is the key word, I guess, but it feels far less like an interrogation. And sometimes our old, if you will, old discovery in quotes, felt like an interrogation. And today it should feel more like a two-way conversation, and it's genuine and transparent. And the best teams explore, as Kate was saying, what really matters to their prospects. And I found that too. We're not talking so much about needs and wants or that are related to features and benefits. If we do, it's a lot later in the discovery process. What the discovery process for me has been in the last couple of years is a beginning that focuses on what it feels like to be at a point where a big decision might be coming, and what makes this prospect happy where they are right now. And how do they imagine being happy in the future? And that's why it feels genuine and transparent. And I think also that's why these sales counselors aren't seen as salespeople. They're seen as important partners in a really important decision. And I think that's a huge shift in how we do things today. And I would also note that feeling of how that discovery feels now would be disconnected if the sales team and the marketing team doesn't get together and make sure they're in sync. And that's the other thing I found, Lisa, is that the messaging and the positioning of the promotional story and the images had to also address the idea that what matters is how do they imagine living in the future and being happy? What does that look like? Then when they sit down one-on-one with the sales counselor, it is in sync with perhaps what even brought them to the door. And I think that that's another thing that's changed, is that our marketing teams are more in sync with our sales teams.
Joan, I love that you brought that up, and what, as I'm thinking about everything that everyone has brought up to this point, what we're seeing here is not a departure from the tried and true foundational standards of how we should always be doing things well, but it's taking and building upon that and adding on a layer of newness, of the new technology, new ways of doing things, contingency planning. I mean, all of those pieces. So it's it's not a complete abandonment of, historically what we know is working, but it's being able to then see that evolve and layering on top of that, new tools and new ways to do things.
Lisa, if I could say, I agree. And what you're talking about is sort of related to appreciative inquiry. It's looking for the best of what works and then imagining how to apply it in the future. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of all that, you find the gaps that don't work too, but you're not throwing out the good. You're building on it.
Absolutely. Well, that is great. And what I'd like to do is now raise a new topic. And that's, thinking back to a year ago, to 2 years ago, we have in fact witnessed a shift in the fundamentals. As I said, we haven't completely jettisoned them, but we've seen a shift in the fundamentals that the field has long ascribed to, the successful senior living marketing and sales process. The way we're doing business, connecting with prospects, developing relationships, communicating with those leads and depositors, and closing sales, it's evolved. So what I'd like to ask the three of you is, from your perspective, what fundamentals of senior living marketing and sales have shifted, and what are the long-term implications as we look forward to 2022 and beyond? Sarah, why don't we have you take that one first again?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is that virtual engagement's here to stay, that it's going to be a part of our programs into the future, that with email nurture campaigns or drip series, whichever you refer to them as, they've been something that have become standard part of our campaigns, but we really need to get beyond that with other types of virtual engagement on an ongoing basis. So things like your tour, things like webinars. And it really allows us to reach a broader audience than we have been when our focus had been so much on live and in person. One of the communities that we work with, Blue Skies of Texas, we just completed an analysis of their webinar series from all of 2021, and we found that 60% of people that are attending their webinars are coming from more than 30 miles from the community, which is much larger than a typical distance that somebody's traveling just for a one-off sales appointment. And I mean, it makes sense that their market is spread broadly. They're an affinity community, previously known as Air Force Village East. So we've always known that they've had a widespread market, but it's such an untapped opportunity from years past that they'll be taking advantage of into the future to engage with these prospects that they previously were waiting for site visits, which was standard for all communities. Now that we can bring them in sooner and engage with them with webinars, with virtual tours, and really get beyond just the standard automated email series. So I'm really excited to have those elements stay. And it's true for other communities as well that are typically drawing up to 30% from beyond the standard primary market area. And like many of our clients in North Carolina, they're drawing 45% from a standard market area. So that's all that untapped potential that we can now take advantage of.
Sarah, I think that's a great point. You know, and I think that, you know, even though the one community is an affinity community, it absolutely lessons learned for, you know, communities who may be saying, you know, I'm only pulling from this tight footprint, that the economies, the cost economies of these different types of digital efforts really provide a great opportunity to test and explore what works for individual communities. So Kate, maybe do you want to take this question next? The fundamentals that you are seeing that have shifted, and what are those long-term implications?
So it's repetitive, but it also bears repeating, right? And strictly from a sales perspective, it's the technology, the tools. You know, if you or your teams haven't tried these new tools, or you tried them and decided the discomfort level was just too high to continue, you might soon find yourself lagging behind the competition. As I think we all know, our industry has a tendency to be a little slow to the party when it comes to technology, but we've had to play catch up very quickly, mostly driven by the onset of the pandemic. Excuse me. I've had teams tell me that their prospects are not using technology in their daily lives, and I've had to kind of push back and say, you know, they really are. For example, our prospects are and have been engaging with our communities online for years. But now they're also downloading apps, they're texting, they're video streaming, video chatting, and using all forms of social media on a pretty consistent basis. So now our sales teams have to normalize the discomfort of using these new tools, because we need to know them even better than our prospects. And also for those prospects or families that are kind of still navigating their way through the technology maze, we need to be able to help them and coach them through the communication process as well. So the bottom line is that all these different modes of communication are coming along with us permanently into the future. There's no escaping. So I say we've got to embrace it. And maybe the biggest epiphany I had after starting to use them myself is, you know, why haven't we always been using these tools in our industry? Maybe we could have been better positioned and helped our prospects sooner.
Kate, I think that's a great point. And talking about, you know, prospects, you know, because I've heard this too from some communities saying our prospects just aren't there. But when you think about how many things that they're engaging with just to live other aspects of their lives, you know, it's a little thing, but it's remarkable how the cute little QR code has had a resurgence of popularity. You know, everything you get from menus to, you know, in my case, you know, forms from the school, all kinds of things. You use a QR code to scan and access something. Our prospects are doing that as well. And therefore we can translate some of that technology into how can we use that for, you know, to improve our marketing and sales efforts. So Well, Kate, thank you for that. Were you going to add something else? I saw the mute
I
come
was
off.
just going to say, I've said this ad nauseum, but, my 76-year-old mother is better at texting. She's better at social media than my actually 26-year-old daughter is. So they're doing it, they know it, and they're using that technology.
Great point. Great point. Joan, what are your thoughts on this question of what fundamentals have shifted and what are those long-term implications as we move forward?
I agree with what both Sarah and Kate said about virtual not going away. It should have always been here in a different way, and being intentional and transparent. And I see that as tying all together. And in some of the sessions we do, there's one of our habit sessions where I have a quote, and it's really very funny, but it like funny things often are, there's a great kernel of truth to it. The lady in the quote says, as I age, my eyesight starts getting weaker, but my ability to see through people gets much better. And I think that's the beyond that everything we've talked about, the intentionality, the virtual everything, how we apply it, being intentional and genuine and transparent. I think that's the big implication for me, Lisa, and it's going to carry forward with long-term implications. I found it possible when enough awareness and thought is put into it to be both virtual and digital and still retain what it means to connect as human beings. And for example, the team I referenced, the Janet and Kate, the great team at McLean, would not have been successful if they had not been still connecting, no matter what approach they used. And that's because they were consistently, intentionally genuine, and they were always very transparent. The other thing they did is they worked smarter, not harder. And Kate mentioned earlier about doing good creative follow-up and all of that. I agree. And that means putting more time into planning our work, which relates to everything we talked about today, because the time we put into planning always pays off down the road, even if we're spending more upfront. And I think that has huge implications for the future. In the end, I think that we've changed. I know that all of us and the people we work with have changed how we look at what we do and how we think about what we do. And I think that that's translating to our prospects, that they recognize that, and that transparency and sense of being very genuine about what a struggle this is, but relating to each other based on that, it's helping prospects engage with us even further. And I think that has a huge payoff for us in the long term. It sure makes it more fun to do our job.
Joan, thank you. Thank you for wrapping this part on that note. So, and thank you, Joan, Kate, Sarah, for all your perspectives and expertise on this. And before I kind of, try and move us to sort of a wrap up and go to questions, any other follow-up rebuttal comments that any of our panelists have on this topic? I think we're good then. So, okay. So I'm just gonna, move into, I know we've covered a lot of good information here, a lot of great perspectives and experience shared by our three panelists, but just to summarize things that were kind of key takeaways for all of us, key to success in 2022. I mean, it's right on the headline of our webinar here is to plan to pivot. To anticipate that is going to need to happen. Marketing and sales plans, we said they should have a plan A, a plan B, even a plan C. Kate, I think you even said a plan D. We need to have the flexibility to adjust quickly to changing circumstances. Whether that is a marketing event or a sales tour that can't be held in person. And the contingency plans need to be trusted and embraced just as much as the primary plan. So that's one. Having clear established standards that are built upon strong core skills are critical. This is something Joan brought up. Drop something, sorry. Having those established standards, they're intentional, they're measurable, and it makes it easier to build a solid contingency plan when you have that foundation in place. And what's important about that too is they create the time and the environment that team members need to be able to build those all important relationships, which is then the third point that our panelists have brought up, which is relationships. They've always been integral to the overall sales process for our field, but now more than ever, it's important to act as a guide, not a salesperson. I think it was brought up about, the uncertainties and the levels of fear that are still prevalent. I think, Kate, those are using your words. Those things are still, it's better, but we're not completely out of the woods yet. So we have a greater need to connect emotionally early in the process, to get to know our prospects on a deeper level, to gain their trust, and to provide that reassurance that you're on their side, you're looking out for their best interest. And that authenticity in these discussions, in that relationship, they should be carried forward in how you and your residents, testimonials are so powerful, how they're telling your community story in a unique and compelling way. We just talked a lot about new technologies, things that we had to adopt in order to just do business in 2020 and 2021. They're not a passing fad. They're here to stay. But to be successful with these new technologies requires careful planning and implementation, as well as leadership support in order to really pay off on that investment. As with making new technology work successfully for you, taking the time to plan on the front end, Joan, this is something that you just brought up, to plan on the front end of your core marketing efforts, your sales activity, planning those contacts, that's going to produce a better ROI for you, for your dollars, as well as your manpower in both the immediate term as well as the long run. And I think the final point that we raised here today is it's possible to be both virtual and digital while still retaining what it means to connect as humans. And I think that's a huge takeaway with where we've evolved as a field. So now we are going to move to questions that have been submitted by our audience members. And we do have a few that are popping in here. So I'll read a question, and then we can have anyone who wants to jump in and answer. We can take a few different answers. So the first one I have here says, I'd be interested hearing how many companies or communities have separate marketing and sales staff. So I think there's potentially a number of different ways that we can answer that. And of course, oftentimes there's it depends. I'm going to throw just a little piece out here and then ask my panelists to contribute to it. I think a really key part of answering this question is how prevalent are silos in an organization, because whether you have a department or staff members who have joint responsibilities of sales and marketing, or whether you have people with very clearly delineated roles, they need to be able to work really well together, because marketing and sales cannot be successful unless they are working to the success of both of them. It's a two-way conversation. We actually internally a number of years ago, team members coined it as smarketing, sales and marketing. We have functional experts here at Levin Company, so I'm going to get off my soapbox there for a second and just see if any of. Are you able to?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I would just throw in there that however you set up, your sales and marketing teams, salespeople need to spend a really good amount of time focused on sales, right? We're talking about how much more time it takes to build relationships with people and build trust. And actually, we're spending more time with fewer prospects. So if we don't spend that time, we're not going to see the results that we need, especially in this environment today.
I absolutely concur with that. Sarah, Kate, or Sarah, Joan, do you have any other, we've got several other questions. I can keep moving if there's any other input on that.
I would say it's typical for most communities to have some level of integration in terms of very separate sales and marketing functions. It's something I see more commonly in either very large communities or multi-site organizations versus the smaller community. The smaller the community is, the more integrated those functions are. And to the point of the other panelists, in some ways, whether they're combined in together in the organization versus separate doesn't matter as much as when they are separate, having that integration, having those teams in lockstep with each other, because when they're not, that's when you get disconnect in the quality of leads that you're generating. How does it align with the actual product? And are you having the messaging that's really resonating with what prospects are saying right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Sarah. And I think that, you know, I agree, Kate, about having salespeople who their job is to do selling activities. But ultimately, I think most organizations that we see, the sales and the marketing functions do report up to the same leadership, and it's not too far up the chain, you know, because otherwise you have people working at different objectives, different purposes. All right, so we've got several more questions here, but one of the questions here is what tool do you recommend for webinars?
So I'll take that one. Actually, this past year, Loving Company made the switch from GoToWebinar to Zoom webinars. That we've just found the interface has worked better for our teams with being able to control things from the back end while the webinar is live. That said, either of those platforms can work very well for your team. Google also has a platform that the interface, I feel like, is a little still in transition and is fine for smaller meetings, but not for larger webinar style meetings.
Yeah, and I think too, just to follow up, Sarah, on what you're saying, of course, we're obviously as Loving Company for our webinars using Zoom webinar, but a big part of that transition decision was to better serve the communities we work with, because we do help them plan and execute webinars, and it's found to be most simple to use for the community staff as well as then their prospects that are logging in. So, but there's a number of different platforms out there, and I think with a lot of technology, you know, key is to go in and you know, look at demos and you know, see which one may actually work best for, you know, for your staff and your organization. But it always is helpful to get kind of a referral to narrow down that list. So we have another question that's similar about tech. Aside from a CRM, what are the major tech tools that communities should be using? So I know we've just talked about Zoom webinar. Joan?
Yeah, there's something we haven't mentioned yet, Lisa, but I think that I've seen it be powerfully helpful, and it's a really simple thing, and that is to have video in your email. That when you do a little video of yourself that is a response to some email query, or a response, a thank you even to a visit that just came. It is powerfully intentional and noticed by the client, by the prospect. It absolutely makes you stand out, and it bridges that gap between digital and human. When someone just does a little video of themselves, and we can put in with our recording a couple of the companies that we've seen doing it. They're very inexpensive. You can try it out for free. And it's wonderful to open a video and see someone say, you know, hi, Lisa, I'm really glad we got together today. I'll call you tomorrow and I can't wait to talk to you again. And have it actually be a person that they're seeing smile at them. And we've used it really to powerful effect in various places.
That's great. And that's related, both that question about the major tech tools and also what video tools do you recommend for one-to-one videos? So I know there's a number of different things, but I don't know if anyone can kind of rattle off any that we've seen work well, both tech tools as well, the one-to-one video tools.
So for video platforms, One Day is out there now, very popular. There's Loom that I've seen used. There are new texting platforms. I mean, you almost have to check every day how many new tools are coming out.
Lisa, one other thing that we would recommend also is the tours that that Kate was suggesting earlier, the one-on-ones not being recorded. That doesn't have to be a highly produced thing. It can be me on my phone with it on open and turned around, walking through the building with it on speaker, chatting to my prospects, saying over here is our dining room, and oh, let me tilt it this way so you can see the view outside. In the summer, we'll be out there more. And you walk through the building with the person observing everything on their computer screen, and it doesn't cost anything, and it's real. And it's something they're doing in their own life with their friends and family. So it feels very normal, and it's simple, very simple.
I think that's a great point. And Kate, you're on mute, but I'll throw this in there. I think a key thing as a salesperson is to ask the prospect, what are they comfortable using? Because someone, you know, who's on an Apple product may say, hey, FaceTime is going to work best for me, but there's other people who are on Android or others, and they don't have FaceTime on that, you know, so you have to be able to, again, kind of meet your prospects where they are, to be able to have potentially comfort level with a couple of different platforms. And Kate, before I hand over the mic to you, I'll just say that one of our participants chimed in and says they use Sales Mail and they love it. So just kind of a peer tip to share with everybody. Kate, what were you going to add?
That's another good one. Joan, just to tag on to what you're saying about the virtual tours, they can be really fun. I mean, you can engage the staff, you know, your leadership, residents along the tour route. It doesn't have to be this uncomfortable kind of weird technology thing. It can be really engaging if you just plan well.
And we've got, and thank you. I am looking at the chat thing, but thank you for those who are putting their questions over into Q&A. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. There's just a couple of things here. One comment just to share with the panelists. One of our attendees said, great comment about building relationships. That is a major intentional emphasis of their team. You know, she said, I started as a teacher and see that as my role in my client's research process. I absolutely love that analogy. Lynn Miller, thank you for that comment. So we have another question here. This time of year seems to be tougher in the Northeast. What do you suggest when people stop picking up the phone? So that's interesting. At first, when I started reading that, I'm thinking Northeast, ice, snow, you know, hard to get people out. But the question went to, what do you suggest when people stop picking up the phone? And I do know I'm going to draw a blank on the actual statistics, But over the past several years, and this was even happening before COVID, the number of really, I think, for the rise of robodials that were happening, that the number of people who are picking up the phone when it's a number they do not recognize, key thing to listen to, it has just plummeted drastically. So I think, part of that is what are the things that we can do to increase the likelihood that the prospect is going to pick up the phone when they see your name. So who wants to field that question?
I'll just say one thing real quick. Text them, right?
Yes.
I mean, text a personal message and say, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Can we set up a time to talk? People still are feeling like texting is, like an invasion of privacy, but it really isn't, right? When you see somebody that come through on text, you feel more comfortable for them to call you. So don't be afraid of the text.
I agree with Kate, Lisa, and I think the thing is about not thinking of it as an invasion of privacy. It's important to think about what you said, Kate. We have to remind ourselves that these people called us first, and they're in our database maybe for years, but at one time they called us first too. And so nobody that we're trying to reach is a bona fide cold call. So that shyness should go away, as Kate was just telling us. And I think that also it's a step removed from this, but it can affect how people answer the phone by getting them to call us back more, which helps because then you worry less about whether they'll answer the phone. The way to get people to call back more is what we said earlier. Plan your call. Make sure you have a reason for picking up the phone and connecting with people. If you don't have a reason, even for a new call that you're taking, an inquiry you've never spoken before, you should still have a plan for what you're going to do with the very valuable time you've been given. When you can make that more relevant, the person hangs up recognizing that that was a win for them. And it's more likely that they'll answer their phone when you call back, or that they'll call you on their own, which is what you really want. And I would close that by noting a lot of people are screening calls, but then call right back and will say, Joan, we're not picking up because of robocalls, but I saw it was you, and so now I'm calling you back. So, but I would say improve what we're doing when we do have the chance to speak with someone, because that helps them connect with us when we call them back later.
Joan, absolutely. And thank you both for speaking to that point. I think it's texting is huge among our population now. It can help open the door, establish a time when they are available to talk. And it's even the things that are happening outside of what the individual sales counselor is doing themselves. And that's why things like automated email series or drip campaigns or your e-newsletter, your blogs, they absolutely have a direct correlation to helping not only empower the prospect by feeling informed, and then they feel maybe less silly having a conversation with you because they feel a little bit more confident in that, but also giving them an opportunity to get to know you. And one of the one of our attendees mentioned that their residents love diving into their video tours, so they're spending time into that. And then of course your residents are sharing those with friends. But also when you have, whether it's those video clips that are coming, in the footer or in an email message, or video messages that are coming in blogs or automated email series, that then your prospect is starting to feel that they know you personally. And I've heard this, both inside of our field of senior living as well as out in, the home builders field, that they've had prospects come in and they're talking to the salesperson in a very personal way because they've watched several videos, that feature them. So I think that's something that we don't want to lose sight of. And, and of course, to the point about residents and those video tours and them getting excited and spending time with it. One of the major things that hasn't changed is the value of a personal referral from a resident. So happy residents beget more happy residents. So that's really important. So we have another question here that says, with personal video messages to clients, do you ask permission to send the messages? And how do clients know where those videos will come from? So I think we've been talking a little bit about this, and Joan, you might have seen that question already. But let me just read that again. With personal video messages to clients, do you ask permission to send? And how do clients know where those videos will come from? And I think there's kind of two parts to that. There's one, if they've reached out for information and they're expecting to hear from you, getting that, that video back to them because they've asked for it, or they've they're exchanging communication is perfectly fine and allowable. If you are inviting people to join your e-newsletter, so this is a best practice that we have of, you want to make sure that they have the option to opt in if they're signing up or requesting information online. One of our standard operating procedures is to have that box pre-checked. They can unselect it, but then there's I think it's a what is it called, Sarah? Like a 2-point authentication that we make sure that they've given permission, because it is still very important to make sure that you're adhering to the CAN-SPAM laws, which is a whole nother separate conversation. But if anybody wants to delve deeper into that, we're happy to have a follow-up. Let's see, checking the time here. We have a comment. Someone shared, our organization just implemented sales mail. So this is a different person, but had heard me mention that. It's easy to use and it's a game changer in getting a personalized message out to prospects and referral partners. And I believe this is a case where, it connects what you're doing with your messages and it connects it with your CRM. And I know that there's chat tools that do that. There's texting tools that do that, because I know one of the questions that's been long a discussion is, if a salesperson is using their own personal cell phone, or even if it's a company issued cell phone, how do they track that information and keep track of that? So being able to look at ways to connect that into your CRM, and a lot of these different plugin tools will integrate with a lot of the robust CRMs that are in our field. Kate, I know you mentioned some of them with Enquire, Sherpa. They're definitely ones that have great ways to integrate those third party tools. So I'm going to check the list of questions and messages if anybody else wants to comment on any of those things. Anyone? Bueller? No, just kidding. Let me see. We've got, thank you everybody for the comments about the presentation. I'm glad you're finding some good tidbits to take away from this. Let's see. I'm looking to see other questions that are in here. So somebody asked a question of, what is the best CRM that integrates with HubSpot? Does anybody know an answer to that? And if we don't know off the top of our head, we can always follow up. Kate?
I want to say most of them do integrate, but contact, the providers directly, and they can tell you who they integrate with.
Yes, and I'm guessing that the question about HubSpot is looking at marketing automation and integrating that with the CRM. So that's a good question. I know that, let's see, I'm trying to see if there's any other questions here that we have. We've got a couple things going on in both the Q&A section as well as the chat. And thank you again all for the positive feedback on this. We certainly had, I appreciated one of our participants said, thank you for this chock full of information, polished presentation. You give me ways to be always thinking. So I love that you used our tagline there. That's fun. And absolutely, we love to do that. Well, let's see. It looks like there's a lot of commentary to scroll through here. It looks like we've got some good had some good questions, and it looks like we've got everything answered. So we're just a little bit ahead of our 1:30 that we said we'd close off. So any, Sarah, Joan, Kate, any other thoughts, comments from our discussion today, or from some of the questions that were raised that you're want to get a word in edgewise before we sign off?
I would just like to thank everybody for joining us today, but also, if there are other questions and conversations that you want to have, just please reach out.
Kate, I think it's a great point. I know sometimes questions come to everyone later, or don't want to necessarily put them out in an open forum. Our email addresses are here on the screen, and you're absolutely welcome and encouraged to reach out to us. All of us here get very excited about discussing these topics, and could go on for hours about it. So if you have something in particular you want to reach out to us about, absolutely please do. And thank you all for attending, and Sarah, Kate, and Joan, thank you all for your participation in this discussion today. As always, it's a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.